The old man's cane hit the floor of the plane, and the whole cabin went quiet. He bent down slowly, his hands shaking, trying to pick it up. Nobody moved to help him, except the man in the expensive suit sitting next to him. And he wasn't reaching down to help. He was laughing. "Maybe you should have booked a wheelchair instead of a seat," he said, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. The old man didn't answer. He just kept reaching for his cane, his U.S. Army veteran cap slipping forward as he leaned down. Nobody knew yet that in the next 20 minutes, that laughing man's whole world was about to fall apart. And the old man beside him was about to be the reason a captain stopped a flight full of passengers in their tracks. His name was Walter, 81 years old. 2 tours overseas, decades ago, in a war most people on that plane had only read about in textbooks. He was flying home from a memorial service for the last man in his old unit. He was alone. He'd always been alone on flights like this, ever since his wife passed. He didn't complain about it. He never did. The man next to him was named Preston, 34, a tech investor flying first class on his father's money and his own ego, the kind of man who believed respect was something you were owed, not something you earned. Preston hadn't looked at Walter once since boarding, not until the cane fell. "Sir, is there a problem?" A flight attendant knelt down, gently picking up the cane and placing it back in Walter's hands. "No trouble," Walter said quietly. "Thank you, ma'am." Preston smirked and turned back to his phone. A woman across the aisle frowned. A young man 2 rows up shook his head. Nobody said anything out loud. That's how it usually goes. People notice cruelty. They just don't always stop it. If you believe kindness still matters, even in the small, quiet moments nobody else notices, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens next on this flight is going to stay with you. 20 minutes into the flight, the turbulence hit. Not the kind you shrug off. The kind that makes drink carts rattle and overhead bins pop open. Preston grabbed his armrest, his knuckles white, his confident smirk gone in an instant. Walter didn't move. He sat still, breathing slow and even, his weathered hands folded calmly over his cane like he'd sat through worse. Because he had. "How are you not scared?" Preston blurted out, forgetting for a moment who he was talking to. Walter looked at him for the first time. Really looked at him. "Son, I've been in worse than this," he said. "A lot worse." Preston didn't answer. Something in the old man's voice made the joke die in his throat. The plane leveled out a minute later. But something had shifted. Preston kept glancing at Walter's jacket. At the patches. At the faded pin above the pocket that read "Freedom is not free." He didn't apologize. Not yet. Pride doesn't fall that fast. But he stopped talking. And for the first time since takeoff, he actually looked uncomfortable in his own skin. Then the intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice was steady, calm, but something about her tone made people put down their phones. The captain walked out of the cockpit herself, microphone in hand, and stopped in the aisle right beside Walter's row. "Before we begin our descent, I want to take a moment," she said, "because we have someone very special on this flight." Every eye in the cabin turned toward her, then toward Walter. 31 years ago, the captain continued, a young Army medic pulled 3 wounded soldiers out of a collapsing transport vehicle during an ambush. He went back in twice more, even after he'd been hit himself, because he refused to leave anyone behind. Walter's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to his hands. "One of those 3 soldiers," the captain said, her voice catching just slightly, "was my father." The cabin went completely silent. He didn't survive that war, but he lived 22 more years because of this man. Long enough to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. Long enough to see me become a pilot. She turned to Walter, and for a moment, the strongest person on that plane wasn't behind the controls. It was the old man in the aisle seat. "I didn't know you'd be on my flight today, sir. I only just saw your name on the manifest 20 minutes ago. And I couldn't let this flight land without every person on this plane knowing who they're sitting next to." The applause started slow. Then it built. Rows and rows of passengers rising to their feet, clapping, some crying, for a man they'd ignored an hour earlier. Preston sat frozen. His face had gone pale. He turned to Walter, and for the first time, his voice actually shook. "I'm sorry," he said. "I had no idea. I judged you before I even knew you." Walter looked at him, not with anger, but with something closer to understanding. "Most folks don't know what they're looking at," Walter said. "That's all right. You know now. The biggest moment of this story hasn't happened yet, So if you're feeling something right now, stay with me, because it's about to get even more powerful. When the plane landed, something Preston never expected happened. He stood up, took off his own jacket, and helped Walter down the aisle himself, carrying his bag, matching his slow pace step by step. No cameras, no audience left to impress. The applause was long over. He did it anyway. At the gate, a group of soldiers in uniform stood waiting, having heard the story from the captain mid-flight through a radio call she'd quietly made. They stood at attention and saluted him. Walter, 81 years old, tired from a memorial for a friend he'd buried that morning, stood a little straighter and saluted back. Preston watched from a few feet away, and for the first time in a long time, he understood that respect isn't something you're born into. It's something you earn, one act of courage, one quiet sacrifice, one moment at a time. Some people spend their whole lives being underestimated, and some of them turn out to be the reason the rest of us are still standing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories that prove kindness and courage never go unnoticed.